My name is Michael, I'm 42 years old, and what I'm about to tell you is not a love story, but a testimony of how someone can dismantle your entire life in the time it takes to brew a cup of coffee. People think they know the person they sleep beside every night, but the truth is that many live with complete strangers. 6 months ago, I came home and found my 2-week-old daughter crying in my sister's arms. My wife was gone. Her closet was empty. There was no trace of her perfume. No goodbye note, just a suffocating silence that announced the beginning of my worst nightmare. She had run away with a man I once considered my best friend, leaving behind a helpless newborn, the same way someone abandons an old piece of furniture on the curb. In that moment, as I watched my daughter's eyes searching for a mother who no longer existed for her, something inside me died. And something far colder and more calculating was born. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I simply took my daughter in my arms, looked at my sister, and knew that Eleanor's world would be reduced to ashes, not by fire, but by the crushing weight of her own betrayal. If you enjoy stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave a like and subscribe. Here we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. To understand how I ended up in that moment of darkness, I need to explain who I was before the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I always considered myself a man of order. I work in international logistics, a field that demands precision, damage control, and above all, the ability to anticipate problems before they happen. My life worked the same way, a system of well-aligned pieces. I had spent my 30s building a stability many people would envy, a paid-off house, a solid career, and what I believed was an unbreakable marriage. Eleanor was 12 years younger than me. When I met her, I was drawn to her energy, that spark that sometimes makes men in their 40s feel like there's still so much life left to live. I became her protector, maybe too much so. I made sure she never lacked anything. She didn't have to worry about bills, the future, or the rough edges of real life. I handled everything. I liked that role. It made me feel like my effort had a purpose. When she decided she wanted to be a mother, it felt like the natural next step, the final piece of my perfect structure. The pregnancy was calm, at least on the surface. I was excited, even if I didn't show it with grand gestures. I bought the best crib, prepared the nursery with almost obsessive attention to detail, and attended every medical appointment. Toward the end, though, Eleanor became more distant. I blamed hormones, the natural fear of a first-time mother. My best friend at the time, Marcus, was always around. He was the kind of guy who walks into a room and instantly owns the attention. Charismatic, always ready with a joke. We'd known each other since college. He was the best man at our wedding. He was there when the baby was born, smiling, patting me on the back, telling me how lucky I was. The irony still makes my stomach turn. Little Sophia was born early Tuesday morning. I remember holding her and feeling a weight of responsibility I had never known before. But while I stared at my daughter, Eleanor stared at her phone. In the days after we returned from the hospital, the atmosphere in the house changed. It became heavy, hard to breathe. She barely touched the baby. She said she was tired, that she needed time. I supported her. I called my sister, Karen, to help us for a few weeks. Karen always had sharp instincts. Sometimes she looked at me with a mix of pity and doubt, but she never said a word. During those 2 weeks, I lived in a state of numbed euphoria. I worked during the day, came home to relieve Karen, and tried to reconnect with a wife who seemed to be living on another planet. Eleanor spent hours locked in the bathroom or went out for walks to clear her head. In my innocence, I thought it was postpartum depression. I felt proud of being the strong one, the man keeping the ship afloat while she recovered. I looked at our life and saw success. A spacious home, financial security, a healthy daughter. I didn't realize I was building everything on quicksand. My mistake was trusting loyalty as if it were a law of physics, something that simply exists without needing verification. I didn't notice the subtle gestures, the looks she exchanged with Marcus when they thought I wasn't watching. I didn't see that he started coming by the house with increasingly absurd excuses, always when I wasn't home. In my mind, I was the architect of a perfect life. Eleanor was my partner, and Marcus was my brother in life. I had everything a man my age could want. But the truth was, I was only the financier of their affair. While I planned Sophia's college fund and reorganized my schedule to be more present at home, they planned their escape. The contrast between my reality and theirs was brutal. I lived to build. They lived to consume what I had built. That final morning before leaving for work, I kissed Elena on the forehead. She didn't even open her eyes. I told her I loved her. She simply nodded. It was the last time I ever saw her in our home. I went to the office with the satisfaction of duty fulfilled, thinking I'd buy something special for dinner that night. I spent the day buried in spreadsheets and international calls, feeling in control of my destiny. I had no idea that while I was closing deals, my wife was packing her life into suitcases paid for by me, ready to abandon a baby who hadn't even learned to focus her eyes, just to follow a man who had nothing to offer her except the thrill of betrayal. That stability I worked so hard to create collapsed with a mid-afternoon call from my sister, asking if Elena had told me what time she'd be back from her doctor's appointment. Karen sounded nervous. Still wrapped in my own calm, I told her not to worry, that Eleanor was probably just running late. But when I hung up, an icy chill ran down my spine, a feeling my logical mind tried to dismiss, but my survival instinct had already recognized as an absolute truth. I got home earlier than usual. The silence that greeted me wasn't the calm of an afternoon nap. It was the silence of a place that had been stripped bare. My sister was in the living room, pacing back and forth with Sophia in her arms. The baby was crying, a weak, exhausted cry. Karen looked at me and didn't need to say a word. Her eyes were red, and her hand was shaking as she held an envelope she had found on the kitchen counter. I took the paper. Unlike hers, my hand was steady. My mind had shifted into the same crisis management mode I use at work. The note was short, almost insulting in its lack of effort. I can't do this anymore, Michael. I'm not the mother you expected, and I'm not the woman you need. Marcus makes me feel alive. Don't look for me. Marcus, my best friend. The man who sat at my table, drank my wine, and held my daughter just days earlier. I felt pressure in my chest, but it wasn't pain. It was a deep, rolling nausea. I walked upstairs slowly. The master bedroom door was open. Elena's closet was empty, except for a couple of hangers swaying in the breeze from the open window. She had taken everything of value, the jewelry I bought her for our anniversaries, the emergency cash, even the collectible watches I had trusted her with. But the worst part wasn't the material theft. It was the emptiness in the baby's room. She hadn't taken a single photo of Sophia, not one piece of clothing. She had erased herself from our daughter's life, as if correcting an error in a spreadsheet. That was when Karen stepped into the room and whispered, "I called Marcus. His wife says he's gone too. They took the car you helped him pay for." Humiliation leaves a metallic taste in the back of your throat. I sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed where we planned our family. And for the first time in years, I felt control slipping through my fingers. This wasn't just the betrayal of a woman, it was the erosion of my entire belief system. I had been the provider, the protector, the reliable man, and my reward was being abandoned with a newborn while they laughed at my naivete in some roadside hotel. The days that followed were a parade of grim discoveries. When I reviewed our accounts, I realized Eleanor had been siphoning money for months, small amounts that added up to a fortune. She had planned this long before giving birth. Marcus, meanwhile, had left behind a trail of debt in his own company, debts I was partially liable for, through documents I had signed out of brotherhood. I found myself alone, with a daughter who depended entirely on me and a financial situation that wasn't catastrophic, but wounded. Mutual friends began calling, some out of pity, others with that morbid curiosity people have when they enjoy watching a man who always seemed in control finally fall. "We're so sorry, Michael," they said. But I could hear the subtext. They fooled you right to your face. The hardest moment came one night around 3 a.m. Sophia wouldn't stop crying. I was exhausted, holding her while trying to warm a bottle. I caught my reflection in the microwave door and didn't recognize myself. Dark circles under my eyes, a stained shirt, and a soul completely drained. That's when my phone buzzed. A new Instagram account. Public. It was a photo of the two of them. On a beach, smiling, drinks in hand. The caption read, "Finally free from our chains, starting over." She looked radiant. There was no trace of the woman who couldn't handle postpartum pressure. This was a woman who had simply decided that her pleasure was worth more than her child's life. Marcus had his arm around her waist, with a sense of ownership that turned my stomach. That's when I understood that to them, I wasn't a human being. I was an obstacle they had finally cleared. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the rocking chair with Sophia asleep on my chest, staring into the darkness of the hallway. Pain solidified into something dense, something cold. If I cried at all, it was inward. Explosive rage is for the weak, for those who lose control. I work in logistics. I know that every action has a reaction, and every debt, no matter how large, can be collected if you have the patience to wait for the right moment. They took my home, my peace, and my trust. They left me with full responsibility while they lived large on my money, but they made one fundamental mistake. They left me alive, and they left me with a reason. In my world, when a shipment goes missing, we trace the root cause and eliminate the error. They were the error. That same night before dawn, I started making calls. Not to the police, not to mediocre family lawyers. I called contacts I had cultivated over 20 years in finance and asset movement. If Elena wanted to start from zero, I would make sure that zero was absolute. If Marcus wanted to feel free, I would show him that there is no prison worse than the legal and financial consequences you can't escape. Being expelled from my happy life was violent. My return to theirs would be surgical. Rebuilding isn't an emotional process. It's a technical one. Over the next 3 months, I became a ghost inside my own life. During the day, I was still the flawless executive and the present father my daughter needed. My sister Karen moved in with me to help care for Sophia, and her presence became the anchor that allowed me to dedicate my nights to what truly mattered, designing the collapse of Elena and Marcus. My first step was hiring a private investigator, a man who asked no questions and delivered only facts. I didn't want photos of them kissing. That no longer hurt me. I wanted bank statements, property records, hidden debts, and above all, the trail of money Elena had stolen from me. We discovered they had settled in a coastal area, living in a rental property registered under a shell company Marcus had created to evade his creditors. They were using my savings to fund an influencer-style lifestyle, pretending to have a prosperity that was never theirs. Next, I contacted my attorney, a man named Stevens, specialized in financial fraud and aggressive family law. "Michael," he said after reviewing the evidence, "we could simply file for divorce and custody, but that would give them time to hide." I shook my head. I didn't want a process that dragged on for years. I wanted a clean strike. I instructed Stevens not to file anything in family court yet. First, we focused on the business side. Marcus had debts for which I was a guarantor, but what he didn't know was that I had quietly purchased those debts through a third company. I was no longer his betrayed friend. I was now his primary creditor. Every dollar he spent on luxury dinners was, legally speaking, money he owed me under very strict terms. He himself had signed years earlier without reading the fine print. At the same time, I discovered that Elena, in her arrogance, hadn't properly closed our joint accounts. She had only changed the passwords. Using my legal authority as the primary account holder, I didn't shut them down. I left them open and set automated alerts for every transaction. Every time she used my card to buy a new dress, I received the exact location and amount. I let them spend. I let them believe they had gotten away with it. Overconfidence is the most effective poison for traitors. My patience was absolute. Sometimes my sister would ask, "Why aren't you doing anything, Michael? She abandoned her daughter. The law should punish her." I would just look at her and ask her to take care of Sophia. I didn't explain that the law is slow, but financial ruin is immediate. I was waiting for the moment they reached their highest point, where the fall would be fatal. The emotional intelligence that helped me rise in my career was now my weapon. I learned that Marcus was seeking investors for a new tourism project. It was the perfect opportunity. I used an intermediary, a man I trusted completely, who approached Marcus posing as a wealthy foreign investor, interested in injecting capital. Marcus, desperate for easy money to sustain Elena's lifestyle, took the bait immediately. He handed over all his financial records, fraudulent business plans, and most importantly, admitted in writing that he was using funds of questionable origin to launch the project. Meanwhile, at home, I was the perfect father. Sophia began to crawl. Every time I watched her, I remembered the emptiness of her room the day Eleanor left. I didn't feel hatred, clouds, judgment. What I felt was cold determination, like a surgeon removing a tumor. I had rebuilt my routine, my finances, and my mental peace. They believed I was at home crying, broken by betrayal. They didn't know that the man they had scammed no longer existed. In his place stood a creditor collecting interest every second of the day. The final touch of my preparation was legal. I drafted a lawsuit for abandonment, misappropriation of funds, and fraud, but I kept it locked away in a drawer. I was waiting for them to sign the contract with my investor. That contract contained termination clauses that would leave them homeless in less than 24 hours if any irregularity in their history was proven. At the end of the third month, the investigator sent me a message. They're celebrating. They just bought a new car with the investor's advance. Tomorrow is the day. That night, I fed Sophia her bottle, laid her in her crib, and poured myself a drink. I looked at the envelope containing the documents. Tomorrow, Elena and Marcus's fantasy would collide with the reality of my rules. There would be no shouting, no television drama, just the sound of doors closing and the silence of bank accounts dropping to zero. The climax didn't happen in an office or a courtroom, but on the terrace of a seaside restaurant, the very place they had chosen to celebrate their success. I was a few miles away, monitoring everything through my phone and my attorney's calls. I didn't need to be there in person to feel the air leaving their lungs. At 2 in the afternoon, while they toasted with champagne paid for by the fake investor's advance, the strike began. First, Elena's credit card was declined. They assumed it was a system error. She tried a second card, then Marcus's, all blocked. At that exact moment, my intermediary, the supposed millionaire, sent them a short message. The contract is terminated due to a breach of the integrity clause. The funds have been frozen by court order. Marcus's face must have been a masterpiece, but that was only the beginning. As they struggled to understand what was happening, 2 men approached their table. They weren't police, they were debt collectors for obligations I had purchased months earlier. They handed Marcus the legal notice of asset seizure. Since he had used the new car and several assets as collateral for those old loans, the men simply waited for them to leave the restaurant to confiscate the vehicle keys. Eleanor tried to call me. I saw her name on my phone and let it ring until it stopped. She called 10 more times. On the 11th, I answered. My voice was as flat as the horizon line. "Michael, what's happening? They've blocked everything. We're on the street," she screamed, using the tone of urgency that once would have made me rush to save her. "You're not on the street, Elena," I said calmly. "You're exactly where you chose to be the day you left Sophia alone in her crib. You're with Marcus. Enjoy his company. It's all you have left." She started crying, saying she'd made a mistake, that the pressure of the baby had driven her crazy. I told her to be quiet. "Don't talk to me about the child. You no longer have any rights to her. While you were spending my money on hotels, I was signing the abandonment lawsuit. The judge already has proof that you used family funds to run away with your lover. Not only will you get nothing, but if you come within 500 meters of my daughter, you will go to prison." Marcus grabbed the phone. He tried to bluff, to threaten me with lawyers. I let out a small laugh, the first in months. "Marcus, I own you. I bought your debts, I bought your promissory notes, and now I own your credit history. You won't be able to rent even a bicycle in this country without me knowing. You're finished." I hung up. The pleasure wasn't explosive. It was slow and heavy, like watching a chess piece slide perfectly into the square you prepared 10 moves earlier. That same afternoon, their social media accounts disappeared. The luxury life they flaunted evaporated within hours. The owner of the property they were living in, warned by my attorney about the tenant's insolvency, gave them 24 hours to vacate. The investigator later told me they spent the night in a cheap motel, arguing at the top of their lungs. The passion that made them feel so alive quickly turned into accusations. She blamed him for not having money. He blamed her for dragging him into my line of sight. Without money, the love they bragged about proved to be as fragile as cheap glass. Days later, I received an email from Marcus begging for mercy, offering to return what remained of the money if I dropped the fraud charges. I didn't reply. I don't negotiate with errors. I let them sink into the legal system. Elena tried to use my sister to reach me, sending messages saying she missed the baby. Karen, following my instructions, sent her only a copy of the abandonment filing and a photo of Sophia sleeping peacefully with a simple message: "She's better off without a parasite." The victory was absolute because there was no fight. It was an emotional and financial eviction. From the cold distance of my resolve, I watched them become what they always were: two mediocre people who thought they could play with the life of a serious man. I left them with nothing, not out of hatred but out of moral justice. In my world of logistics, when an element fails and damages the system, it gets removed. And they were already trash in the landfill of my past. 6 months have passed since Elena and Marcus's names stopped being a daily concern and became nothing more than an anecdote about how life eventually puts everyone in their place. There was no movie-style ending, no tearful forgiveness, no last-minute reconciliation. Reality is far drier and far less glamorous. I know that Marcus now works a low-level administrative job, living in a rented room, trying to pay off a fraction of the debt I still hold around his neck. Elena tried to find another protector, but in our world news travels fast. Her reputation as the woman who abandoned her newborn daughter goes before her, and beauty, when mixed with betrayal, loses all its market value. My life, on the other hand, has found its rhythm again. Sophia is already saying her first words, and although she doesn't have a mother present, she has a father who doesn't lie to her and an aunt who adores her. I don't feel like a hero. I don't feel like a happy man in the traditional sense of the word. I feel like a man who did what had to be done. Sometimes people ask me if I didn't go too far, if the coldness with which I dismantled their lives wasn't excessive. I simply answer that loyalty is a contract, and when it's broken unilaterally, it carries penalties. I've learned that time doesn't heal wounds. Time only gives you the distance needed to see the scars and understand why they exist. I keep no photos of my wedding, no mementos of my so-called friendship with Marcus. Those objects ended up in the same place they did: oblivion. My daughter will grow up knowing that her father is a man of his word, a man who builds and protects, but also a man who doesn't allow what is his to be taken, without a price being paid. Sitting in my office, watching the sun set behind the buildings, I realize that true peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the certainty that you have the ability to resolve it. I'm not looking for love, nor for deep new friendships right now. My focus is on Sophia and on my company. Everything else is just noise. People often say that forgiveness is for yourself, a way to be at peace. I believe peace comes from justice. Sleeping soundly at night is priceless, and I sleep perfectly well knowing that each of them has exactly what they deserve. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching life collect its debts. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave a like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories.